test, optimize, scale. Very excited to have JP Johl here, founder and CEO of AdTribute Agency. JP has run over $250 million in media, has worked with over 100 brands, over 11 verticals. Excited to be able to bring this perspective, these insights, this expertise to the discussion. We've had a lot of entrepreneurs, different types of founders on here, service providers who work in more early stage type of initiatives. So to be able to speak to performance, be able to speak to result-oriented marketing at this scale for these large brands that JP is a part of, I'm personally excited about. JP, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jason, thank you. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, with the format, we're going to talk about, testing, optimizing, what to scale, but I'd like to start with you. Could you give us some background on your history, your story, everything you've done to get to the point you're at today?
Yeah, of course. I've been in performance marketing for a little over 9 years now. I got my start in the nonprofit space while I was still in school. And then upon graduating, I took a job at a mobile ad tech network called Stripe, which was then acquired by ValueClick, rebranded as Conversant, and, was acquired again a few years ago. So from there, I kind of took another job leading a mobile ad tech marketing management team at a startup, and kind of stayed in the ad tech space for a bit before expanding and kind of learning all these different verticals and becoming a full-fledged performance marketing expert.
Very nice. Very nice. I come from the world of mobile ad tech as well. Stripe, ValueClick, definitely resonate. I think was in some RFPs against you guys back then, maybe some different trading scenarios. And then as they evolved to Conversant, love to hear how that all evolved. And so you've been part of it. You've seen the early days, the wild, wild west of mobile, which is the top format for Facebook, a focal point for digital advertising. It's heavy on the programmatic platforms now as well. You've really seen this whole evolution from days where there was limited reporting and onward.
Yeah. I remember when all you were able to really track were impressions and clicks, right? Even unique views weren't a thing, all the way down to being able to actually track installs was a huge success. And, that was something that Stripe really excelled at. And, now down to the point of being able to track every little action that someone takes once they install an ad, lifetime value, all of that. So it's been a crazy couple of years in the marketing ad tech space.
Absolutely. It must do so much for your campaigns. I mean, I recall looking at analytics and not being able to add any type of third-party attribution, third-party verification, having some question marks on what was really occurring. A lot of storytelling in those days. So being able to look at it all the way through the funnel must open up a lot of capabilities for you at this point in your campaigns now.
Yeah, absolutely. When I studied advertising at the University of San Francisco, and, they required us to take an Excel class, and it was specific only to the advertising major. And, back then I didn't really quite understand why, this was a requirement, but, I would say that the majority of my time these days is spent looking at data in Excel. So that was probably the most useful class that I took out of all of the other advertising classes throughout my college courses.
Yeah, definitely. Only way to measure anything is with numbers, the organization of that data, and being able to articulate exactly what a media buy is doing. I know makes all the difference for our campaigns. We'll work with startups who will basically say one budget has to turn into the next. So we have to be very algorithmic in our planning and what we anticipate for each step of the funnel. You guys are working with much bigger groups. Some of the top names in food and beverage, automotive, SaaS, and different types of tech platforms. Could you speak a little bit about your clientele and, maybe even get into some of the type of initiatives, saying what you can? You don't have to break everything down in terms of any confidential information, but saying what you can about, the type of KPIs, key performance indicators you're looking at and how you're setting things up for success.
Yeah, our clientele here at AdTribute is really kind of across the board. We don't necessarily focus on any specific verticals. We like to work with brands, ones that we know that we can help, ones that we enjoy working with. We stand behind the product or the company message. And, that's, to me, is more important. And one of the things that I love about being able to run my own agency versus being forced to work with certain clients. You always have those sales guys that'll oversell a campaign and then you get stuck working on it and trying to break it to the client that those goals are, not very realistic. I love that I don't have to deal with that anymore. Throughout my career, I've worked on campaigns really from where I'm spending $250 a week up to, $52,000 a day with certain clients. So really kind of work that full spectrum. And, a lot of our clients now too are kind of across that spectrum, from SMB startups to, publicly traded companies. So it does depend on, the actual client. So we do handle some clients across the board, and, the strategies for them are all very different. We have some mobile application clients where we're looking at ad revenue and trying to look at, the quality of those users, how many are actually staying on for more than one day, the daily retention, monthly retention, length of actual gameplay. We have subscription clients for a dating app, so looking at the LTV of those clients, not just the upfront CPI or sign up. We have clients where we're working on in-store purchases, which, of course, used to be almost impossible to track, but now is getting a lot easier with a lot of these data attribution partners. So being able to see, how many people are we actually driving to that store that came from our ads. So, of course, we're also working with a lot of eCommerce clients. So that, of course, becomes the easiest to track, instant return on ad spend, things like that. But, a lot of it is having to kind of gauge initial upfront costs and KPIs of installs or signups versus, LTV in the long term, maybe 3-6 months out. So always trying to find a unique balance in between those two.
Very nice. Very nice. And, if you're working on a campaign, 52K a day, 7 figures a month type of activation, whether it's app install, e-commerce, you mentioned some closed loop, in-store type attribution models and conversion data around that. Are clients coming to you with everything mapped out? Do they know the personas? Do they know the performance benchmarks at each stage, at each touch point? Or are you guys building out a lot of that strategy in the planning stages? What is it like working on a campaign of that size?
I would say that 90 to 95%, nothing's really mapped out, or even some of those KPIs, or, who they think is their target audience isn't really quite the case. So before we really start any of these campaigns, we like to kind of do our own consumer behavior research, figure out who their exact target market really is. They'll come to us with broad audience, like, oh, it's for millennials. Well, great, but that's a pretty broad range. For some clients, we'll take it down and we'll break that down into multiple subsects and say, okay, this is the 3 categories of, the types of people you want to go after. For instance, we worked with a kind of a community and skincare line for bald and balding men. So of course, they came to us and said, our audience is bald and balding men. Well, great, but that's also a big category. And also a little harder to target. So what we did to really kind of come up with that campaign and figure out where we wanted to allocate the dollars to kind of bring the biggest return on was we broke that segment out into 3 categories of, you know, bald men who have accepted that they're balding, bald men that are in denial, and people that are either very premature in the balding stage or, you know, don't really care at all, right? So from there, we were able to then break those segments out into people that have, you know, legitimate skincare routines. You know, they spend a lot of time and money on that every day. There's people that, you know, are stuck in their habits and aren't looking for a change. And then those that, you know, take about 5 minutes to get ready every morning. And so from there, we were able to kind of break down the stages into 3 different stages. And within each of those 3 stages, there was 3 different subsects. And we were able to say, okay, those that have accepted that they're balding and have a, you know, routine and spend a lot of time and effort into the way they look and their skincare regimen are the ones that we want to focus on now. Those that also kind of focus on their skincare regimen, but, you know, are either not balding or in denial, or ones that maybe we want to spend some money on for right now, but really we want to kind of increase the awareness because those are going to be the customers down the line once that they have accepted that they're balding.
I love the example. I love the categories of the target audiences there as well too, and how thought out it is in terms of who you're going after. So you're starting with these audiences. You're putting a lot of the recommendations in place, even some of the performance benchmarks, regardless of what data they're coming to you with. So you're running that. Are you looking for specific touch points of these audiences? Do you include search, social, display? Are you looking at additional platforms that are available on ad exchanges such as video, native, audio? There's a lot of publisher direct buys. Any channels that work particularly well for people either accepting or not quite yet conscious of their baldingness?
Yeah, you know, we work with all of the channels. One of the first things that we kind of look at before looking at the channels is the budget, right? What kind of budget are we playing with? Because we don't want to spread ourselves too thin, especially in the testing and learning phase. We want to make sure that we're getting enough data. We're learning about these specific audiences, creatives, bidding strategies, and platforms. So, you know, if we don't have enough budget to support 5 different channels, then that's fine. We're going to start with, you know, 1, 2 channels that we know are going to work or that we assume are going to work. And also when it comes to choosing those channels, obviously we look at, you know, industry standards, what their competitors are doing, you know, where they're spending most of their money. But also as a part of our audience research, we like to kind of dive into seeing what platforms are they using, where are they consuming their media, and how are they consuming it? Because how someone consumes media on Facebook is going to be very different than how they consume it on YouTube or Snapchat, or, you know, even TV or radio buy. So all of that really kind of plays in a factor into what platforms and how many platforms we recommend. Along with, you know, trying to figure out how many different audiences and creatives are we going to be testing. You know, I think that the biggest problem that a lot of new marketers or startups come into is that they take little bits and pieces of, oh, so-and-so did this, they studied about that, and so did this, and we're going to do part of this, and we're going to do part of that, and they kind of try to make a little Frankenstein marketing plan. And, you know, it's always great to study competitors and what other people in other industries are even doing, but making sure that, you know, you have a concise and well thought out testing strategy is really important. And sticking to that, because, you know, especially when you're A/B testing, if you don't know what variables are causing the changes, then that's okay for right now. But when that campaign performance starts to die down, then you're left wondering, is it the audience? Has that shifted? Has the platform shifted? Is it the creative? What's causing all of this? Is it the times that are different? And if you're not able to pinpoint exactly what that is, then you're running into a lot of issues, because let's say, you started off with $10,000 budget, but, since then we've ramped up to a $100,000 budget. Well, now that you're starting to see a diminishing return on performance, you have no idea what made that campaign so successful initially. And now you're either going to be spending all of that money and testing new things, or having to ramp things back down, which, is never great. So making sure that you understand what is causing the success of that campaign is very important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Having a full understanding of the funnel, the algorithm, whether things are working, aren't, is or not, or so crucial. You could pinpoint where that's occurring. And like you said, ramping it up from 10 to 100, diminishing return at 100. Do you take it back down to 10 if it's not working? No, you try to identify where, look at really what's driving it. You'd think working with these bigger brands at times, they basically say, run these creatives to these audiences, to these URLs. To hear all of the breakdown and what goes on the strategy, the target audience personas you're building, where you're actually mapping out the touch points and where time spent online from each of the audiences and subsects there, is definitely eye-opening. And when it comes to channels, if you find out, hey, they spend a lot of time on social, they're checking out these apps, doing a little bit of display, and they search a lot. Do you have standard breakdowns in terms of allocation of spends, of what percentage of media is going where? Is that completely different on each campaign and not even in the same ranges, and you're building that out in a custom fashion and the percentages are upside down from one campaign to the next? How do you figure out the allocations? How do you figure out how much you want to spend on each channel?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And, it's one of the questions I do get from a lot of clients before we dive in. And really, it depends on, your overall budget and what we're going to be testing. Do we know certain things, right? Do we have a lookalike audience? Do we know we've seen success? We know what types of creatives work. Well, the more that you eliminate from overall testing, the better that is, and the more things that we can test. The other things, to take into account is, if for SEM, for example, what type of inventory is there? Is there a lot of search volume, and what's that competition look like, right? If, your product is being sold for $10, but the average cost per click for, that category of search terms is $8, then we probably know that, we're going to need a real high conversion rate, which probably isn't going to happen right off the bat to even be successful. So that's not to say that we're going to cut SEM completely or not test it. It might be that we test it more down the line, or that we start with a smaller test and try some, kind of out of the box keyword ideas, or, try to see what kind of traffic we can get with having, a lower CPC or CPA bid.
Okay. So in terms of testing, you're building out this full plan, this roadmap, starting with the audiences, regardless of what you get from the clients. You want to be able to map this out for audiences, subsections of those audiences. You then want to look at channels, have a breakdown based on the available inventory. So you're mentioning for search engine marketing there, looking at the cost per click, understanding what makes sense. Imagine you're looking at similar types of availabilities for the targeting on social platforms or specific publishers, things along those lines. Do you then build customized creative for each of these audiences, so it's speaking to them on a more natural level? How many different creatives are you testing out for a given audience? Do you guys have any type of standardized approach towards that?
Yeah, so the number of creatives really depends on the platform. Certain platforms, it's better to have more creative. Some, you can't really get a full sense of the test. One of the things that I've been really seeing here on Facebook and Instagram as of late is one creative sometimes is monopolizing 100% of the budget. This is something that I've really seen with a couple of different clients in the last probably 2 or 3 months. since Facebook optimized their, or, you know, kind of unrolled their kind of new back-end algorithm. And, you know, that becomes a big issue because if you're trying to get a real good A/B test, but we do like to build out specific creatives for each specific platform and audience because, you know, how, just as I mentioned before, people interact with different platforms very differently. And just because, you know, you're a bald or balding man, you know, depending on which stage you're on in that journey and, you know, kind of what your skincare routine looks like, different things are going to speak to you in a very different way. So, you know, I do like to run, I'd like to get at least quite a few different creatives and then slowly test them out. So for instance, for Facebook, for instance, you know, I want to maybe only run 4, maybe 6 ads at a time per ad group or ad set. SEM, you know, you can kind of get away with a little bit more, but again, budget is always another constraint there. You know, one of the things that I always like to do, and something that we did for this e-commerce fashion retailer, where we had a real limited time to spend quite a bit of money and test and, you know, drive results for them, was that we took about 17 different posts and we ran them organically with a little bit of money boosting those posts, about $10 to $25 a day over about 7 days each, and seeing which one had the most organic, or sorry, not just organic, but organic and most paid engagement. And then from there, we limited it down, took the 4 winners, spent a little bit more money social proofing those ads before we launched. So that's another really great cost-effective way to test out which creatives are resonating with your audience. So when you're going at a cost per engagement, you know, you can get a lot more results than if I'm going for a purchase, a more down the funnel action can be a lot more costly to test things. So that's another really good way that we like to kind of find the baseline of what's working and what's not. And then from there, we will go ahead and make some additional ad units like that, some slight variations and kind of tweak to see what about that ad is kind of working and how can we improve that.
Almost like a focus group or study where you're running these promoted posts. You're looking for the audience to tell you which ones they like the most based on the engagement metrics. And then you're taking it to more performance oriented Facebook ad placements from there, where the promoted post that's optimizing towards engagement, maybe at a later point, you're taking it to a traffic, a conversion, an install campaign, but you know which messages, which video, which images the audience is favoring at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, that's actually one of the things that I think is the biggest misconception about performance marketing is that it's only for sales or leads. You know, we use performance marketing in a lot of different ways. We've worked with some bigger brands that maybe are launching, you know, either a new product line or even a new company within the umbrella. And, you know, traditionally you would use a consumer research group, you know, have them run a study, but, you know, those are pretty costly and you have a limited pool there. One of the things that we've done is actually create new Facebook pages for them, set it up as a new brand and run tests to landing pages, you know, to figure out what type of products work better, what names work better, you know, what type of audiences that are resonating with the creative, what creatives actually work. And then from there, we'll also actually ask them for a survey and enter in their email to either get notified when the product's available or to get a discount code when the product's available. So now with the same price of a consumer research project, you've gone ahead and you've built up your pixel, right? So now you season that pixel, you know what type of audiences are, you know, what demographics are actually resonating with the product, what product actually fits better, the messaging, all of those factors. You've now actually really jump-started your campaign for when you do launch this product. And on top of that, you know, once you have those emails, you can now build lookalike audiences off of all of that. And getting real, true reactions from people in a live environment, which I think is so much more valuable than an actual consumer research study.
I agree. And Facebook makes it pretty cost effective to go in and market test. I've seen brands do it, $10 a day per ad set, maybe 5 to 10 ad sets, virtually, $50, $100 a day is not going to make a dent looking at some different programmatic platforms. To be able to do that on social, to be able to gauge, maybe not in, scientific method approved conclusive data, but to an extent on you're seeing, different outliers, you're seeing different drivers across the audiences, across the creatives, be able to take that to more conversion focused benchmarks at a later time and fill the funnel. You mentioned creating the lookalike audiences too, but just focusing on the funnel for a second there, we'll run traffic campaigns to get a low cost per click, and then the retargeting through the conversion focused metrics. We'll run add to cart or mid-funnel type KPIs and tell Facebook to optimize off that. That way we're surpassing, 50 conversions a week, which is when their technology, when their AI can really do its trick. So yeah, we've seen a benefit to using non-performance oriented benchmarks to then stack and see a much better cost per acquisition, customer acquisition cost, cost per install, what have you, at a later stage. So it's definitely very interesting to hear. And yeah, you're right. When I think performance marketing, I'm thinking affiliate, I'm thinking CPA buys, I'm thinking very aggressive, optimized campaigns that are CPM or CPC backing into a CPA. Bunch of fun acronyms for the audience. They're just basically saying buying impressions, buying clicks, or buying the performance. But yeah, that's very interesting to hear of how much of it is a focus for you and how that ends up producing a stronger performance benchmark at the end of the day, a better result at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big believer in the full funnel marketing strategy. It's something that we do with all of our clients. It's kind of counterintuitive. You think, well, if I want sales, why am I not optimizing towards sales? And, why am I doing traffic campaigns? And then I want to retarget and all of this. But, we've really seen that it's the best way to get, a great CPA and the best return on ad spend.
Yeah, absolutely. What about video views? Have you guys done anything maybe on Facebook where you're building a retargeting pool from video views at a much cheaper rate than if you're driving it from a traffic campaign? Have you seen stronger performance over time when you are able to reach an audience with a video view and then additional ad formats later in the funnel? Yeah.
The video view funnel, or at the top of the funnel, is always a great strategy. I think the biggest caveat there is how well can you make that video, right? I think people just kind of create videos and just assume they're going to work really well because they spend a lot of money, and they're these really high quality, production quality videos. But what they don't do is they don't catch the user's attention, quickly. They don't really explain what the product or the brand is. And, the biggest misconception is that you need to go and have this giant, crazy production budget for these videos, when a lot of times you can really use lower quality production if you make the ad and the content of the video better. I would much rather have a lower production video than, a high production studio video that just doesn't really hit any of the main points of an ad. With one of our clients, we've actually seen that lower production videos and images actually outperformed high production videos by over, I think, almost 4x.
Wow. And I've heard studies like that, not in that type of direct comparison where, high production video, same campaign with the low production video and seeing better results. It definitely makes sense. And I've heard more stories around it to have a more native feel on platforms like TikTok and Snapchat. TikTok's ad platform has had some big breakthroughs over the past few months. What about data? You'd mentioned lookalike audiences. We try to do a lot with custom audiences, even to the extent of what white collar, like white data mining, everything above water, but data mining to reach very specific individuals and upload that to custom audiences. We've had clients hire us to create additional Facebook pages and create themed pages, themed audiences to then use for advertising targeting. We've had groups share with us over custom audiences. So we have that aspect of it, both first party and different types of sharing arrangements, as well as third party. I know there's a whole world of data providers when it comes to programmatic platforms. A lot of those are on the back end of Facebook and you can't see the actual provider. And I've heard mixed responses in terms of third party data that's made accessible from a long list of companies, including MasterCard and Nielsen, Axiom, all these different data providers. Have you placed an emphasis, have you seen results in the creation of your own first-party data for advertising targeting and or third-party usage of data on your campaigns?
Yeah. Excuse me. I think that third-party data can be very valuable when you're first starting out and you don't have those audiences to build good custom and lookalike audiences. And it's something, it's a very niche target that you're trying to get. Then I think third-party data can really help kind of set the tone and get those conversions in the beginning. Now, I've had the same experiences with, I've used so many different third-party providers, and, just because it worked for client A, I've seen it just absolutely fail with client B. It really depends on the quality of, of those audiences for each different industry. And it's really kind of hit or miss there. One of the things that I do like though, is starting those theme pages and building an audience through that and then using that to retarget. I've also seen success partnering with influencers. And as a part of a deal of having them, create ad content for us, we then also ask access to their audience as well. And then if they're willing, being able to run the ads through their page. So that really is so much more successful when you can run ads through an influencer's page as well, because that builds instant credibility with the consumer. Now, a lot of influencers aren't willing to do that, or if they are, it's at a real high cost. But what I've always seen too is that the page that you're going to run the ads through doesn't always have to be the biggest page. As long as they have some sort of credibility, you can tell that it's not just something that you started yesterday and are pretending to be somebody. We've seen some success with using people that have only 5,000, 4,000, 10,000 followers, because you can tell that, you didn't start that page. I think that's one of the biggest things too, is people and brands will start these pages and all they ever do after they get an audience is post about their brand. And consumers can start to kind of pick that up. Today's consumer is not stupid and can spot, fake, illegitimate advertising a mile away.
Consumers are smart. They're getting smarter. They definitely understand more marketing psychology at this point. Couldn't agree with that more. We seek out opportunities where we can even run influencer posts, but through syndication via media buys. We've used different tools to take it to other advertising channels, what was said on social, kind of getting beyond the walled gardens. We've explored different platforms where we have access to influencer pages that we can then run our own Facebook ads from and buy on a cost per click from some influencer networks who are able to do that type of influencer amplification, where they'll get influencers to opt in and then run off a page, a post that they're basically accepting as part of this whole marketplace. Definitely powerful stuff. We've had campaigns where there was an influencer post that ran for a day, high amount of conversions in that 24 to 48 hours, but we then ran as a social ad for the next 6 to 12 months off and on, and continue to receive value off that, continue to get a high return on ad spend, and really maximize that activation for the brand. So love how you brought that up. Are there any other channels? Is there anything else that you recommend for listeners to test out? Is there any, I mentioned TikTok or Snapchat, any new social platforms or anything that is maybe more fundamental, but are there any other channels, things that you would recommend for the audience to test out?
Yeah, we've actually been seeing a lot of success with TikTok and even Snapchat for some of our clients. TikTok, of course, had never run some things, but Facebook had kind of been their bread and butter for the last 5-6 years. And we were able to really kind of revamp the Snapchat campaigns to increase that to outperform Facebook in a short period of time. I think within 1 month, it overtook Facebook as a better CPA, lower costs. And, overall, TikTok has been working really well. And I've also seen a difference in the last month alone about how much more competitive it's gotten. They've really started to open up that platform, but at the same time, it's still so cheap and cost effective compared to a lot of these other channels. Within the first week of running a TikTok campaign for one of our clients, we were able to cut their CPA to a fourth of what we were seeing on Facebook or Google or, third-party networks, anything across the board. We were able to see some really good performance there and are continuing to see that. I think the other really cool thing and biggest misconception that people always have about TikTok is that, it's only for tweens and maybe early, younger teenagers. The platform has really changed in the last couple of months, and it has really grown to past that, right? There's people in their 20s, their 30s, their 40s, their 50s and beyond that are starting to use TikTok now. And, I think COVID definitely helped kind of accelerate that with everyone kind of stuck at home bored. But, one of the clients we run, their target market is 18 to 40-year-olds. And of course, we run different campaigns throughout that for each age group, but they're seeing a lot of success. And, they're not targeting anyone that's 12, 13. So, I think always keeping at least 20 to 25% of your budget to test new things every month is really important. And that's something that we like to do. Even when after the initial tests, we always keep 20 to 25% to test new creatives, new audiences, and new platforms, particularly because platforms change, certain things happen, back-end algorithms change, platforms get saturated as time goes on, people stop using certain platforms. But one of the things that, not a lot of people think about either is using an ad network, using a third party, programmatic buy. And especially I've seen a lot of people kind of just not even think about OTT. And I think that's a mistake. We've seen some really great results when it comes to that awareness stage for OTT. YouTube is also another great channel that most people kind of is their default video channel outside of Facebook. But OTT is actually something that, I think should be considered, and, brands and marketers should really pay attention and really kind of figure out if that might be a great channel for them to test on the awareness stage.
These are great insights. I love how you broke down each channel there. What are you buying when it comes to OTT? Is there anything that a non-experienced OTT marketer should look at?
I think that there's a lot of third parties, and there's a lot of kind of these affiliate groups, and those are kind of the ones that people kind of cling to first. And there's a couple things. Once there's a middleman, the costs go up. Inventory, you get kind of second selection at inventory. And sometimes the targeting capabilities are not quite the same. So depending on your budget, and if you want to spread that out to multiple different providers, or if you just want one, if you just want Hulu, or you just want Dish, why not go directly to them, or go directly to the actual publishers that they have and try to work that way, especially if your budget's not that big that you can't really necessarily afford to spread it out between 5 different places. So don't always just go for the easiest, quickest find.
Yeah. And ad networks as well. There's been a lot of things said about ad networks over the past few years. I know Facebook and the self-serve platform has really changed things up there, where it was generally more experienced buyers, even data scientist level traders who were buying on DSPs, on demand side platforms, on the advertising campaigns. They're connected to supply side platforms as part of this overall advertising exchange, and using programmatic AI and machine learning to buy off all of that. We've found a lot of success in, but we found it's all about how you're buying. And if an ad network could add value there, even if they don't have a transparent margin, if they're hitting our performance benchmarks when it comes to, mid-funnel and definitely lower funnel clicks, conversions, return on ad spends, we're very happy. And if they have anything exclusive in terms of publisher relationships, advertising inventory, data of audiences, and overall just very strong algorithms on how they're setting up and casting a wide net, identifying pockets of performance, then looking to scale that. We've been happy to use ad networks as vendors for that, or just some of our own buys on different programmatic platforms. Are there any tricks to that? Is there anything when it comes to a white list of sites or a tier 1 list of sites that you use on a regular basis, contextual targeting alongside keyword driven articles, anything in terms of day and time of week optimizing that's really been a driver for you in your campaigns for your clients?
Yeah. I think you brought up a great point. A lot of times ad networks do have those relationships and can get you into those publishers without a huge buy. And so, kind of piggybacking off that statement and my previous statement, just because it's a third party or middleman doesn't mean necessarily don't go with them. I meant to say kind of more, do your research. And also, coming from the ad network side as well, people always wanted the biggest publishing names and things like that. So they were very particular about transparency, and they only want to run on these sites. But, realistically, it's not those big names that are the ones that actually drive the best performance, right? Sure, it's a great logo, and ad networks will always throw those logos on top versus, Joe Schmo's, auto body page. But as long as those conversions are panning out and the quality of those users is high, why does it matter? Focus on the performance and the quality of those users versus where the ads are necessarily running. Of course, you want to make sure that it's brand safe, and you don't want to be running on, sites that, don't fit your brand narrative and your brand beliefs. But other than that, I don't really care, where it runs. And, I don't think that you marketers and brands should get hung up on that. The other thing really being, wanting to kind of control every little aspect of a third party network or an ad network is something that, you shouldn't really focus on at all. A lot of these account managers, they're incentivized internally to keep this account. They want to keep you as a client, and they know what works best because they're seeing it across, hundreds of different advertisers. So, don't necessarily worry about that, but also, don't always take everything they say with a grain of salt. If you don't believe it up front, ask for some more proof. Just do your due diligence. When it comes to contextual targeting, that works very well for a lot of our clients. but being very focused on what those keywords are and treating it like an SEM campaign is extremely important, right? If you sell air filters for cars, and you're trying to do it for, you're doing contextual targeting around that, you want to be very specific with those keywords that you're targeting, right? You don't want to target anything that mentions cars or performance or even, air. I know these things sound kind of, self-explaining, but you'd be surprised, right? You want to focus on the negative keywords just as much, if not more, than the actual keywords and the type of text that you're actually trying to look for.
Those are definitely great points. And like how you mentioned, the big site, small publisher thing, we used to have clients ask to see the site list and question why, weather.com and, mid-tier blogs were on there. And then we'd show them the performance associated and they'd start to understand why. We've had to run campaigns that are very small site lists, carried high CPMs, high rates and limited performance. Really like to look at all of these different sites across a pretty broad list to begin and then narrow it down by the sites that are performing. And we have seen those outliers. We've had fashion campaigns, women's fashion campaigns that saw the most conversions from real estate sites, which we would have never included if we were listening to, let's say, the client's recommendations and in terms of where they wanted to be. So really letting the data, really letting the analytics show us where to go, where to optimize has been instrumental for us. So really resonate with those points.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned weather.com because in my ad network days, we use them, and I don't know what it is about that site, but man, it converts for like almost everybody that we've run ads for. The other thing to kind of think about is we also had a lending company that their number one driver for filling out full, good quality leads was actually a free solitaire game. And, if you assumed anything, if I gave you a list of networks publishers that we're going to run on, one of the first ones you're going to cross off is that free solitaire app. Because who's playing solitaire and is going to fill that out? But, they were spending about $40,000 a day with us, and that was the number one publisher for them. So, I agree wholeheartedly with that point. Always let the data speak for itself. Assumptions, in my opinion, are the death of good performance marketing. I don't care how many times you do things, how many campaigns you've launched, you're always surprised at the audience, the publisher, the network, or the creative that works. There's always going to be those surprises, no matter how many times you've done this. And this happens to me to this day.
Oh yeah. There's always assumptions and things we put in the strategy that are backed by research, but they're meaningless if not backed by analytics once that actual market testing occurs. And if I were to look at, clients ahead of time and say, hey, this landing page is going to work, this campaign is going to surpass its performance goals, I wouldn't be right at all times. It really comes down to the optimizing. And actually want to ask you, in this segment, in this breadth of the discussion here, what do you do when a campaign's not working? What do you do when the assumptions are not coming to life? I like to define a good marketer, good marketing talent as a good problem solver. Anyone could set something up in a strong way if they follow, the best practices. But what do you do creatively when you see a campaign not hitting the levels that you had outlined and aligned on with the client?
So that's a great question. And, one of the things that I always look at is, was it working and now it's not, or did it never work? And if it never worked, then we look at a couple of different things. We look at, okay, where's the drop off coming from? So for an e-commerce client, we can say, okay, is it, CTR is horrible. Okay, well, let's look at the CTR. Is it horrible across all of the creatives? Is it horrible across all of the audiences? Is it certain creatives don't work, certain audiences, all platforms or just one platform? Is it the the product views that are lacking. So we're getting them to the site, but then they're not converting. Is it, they're adding the cart, but not following through. So really kind of dissecting that campaign and understanding exactly where that drop off is really important. And seeing, if it's on the site, well, okay, well, let's talk to them about that site. Do they have Hotjar? Do they have some sort of analytics tools to see, how users are interacting with the site? If it's the add to cart drop off, is it something with our retargeting that's not working? Or, is the checkout process just completely off? Is it super cumbersome? Is there surprise shipping fees? You're buying a $20 product and then you're spending $18 on shipping. Well, okay, that could be a case, but you really have to kind of take it step by step and starting from the beginning and working through all of those metrics and saying, okay, where's the drop off? And if the drop off's right up front, then you have to look at, is it the creative? Typically all have very different creatives set. So something should resonate. Is this the type of creative that's worked for them in the past or not? Okay, so we tried something completely new. They've never run any creative like this. Well, then, let's loop in some of the older types of creative or the creative that we know worked and see if that changes things. Let's try and compare the audience notes. Maybe it's the new messaging that's not resonating, or, it's this particular audience. We thought this one was going to be the best one and it's just not working. So we'll play around with that. Look at lookalike sizes. And also, for Facebook or Instagram, for instance, I like to look at the first time impression ratio. If the campaign has been running for a while, if that number starts to get really low, then I know that, we've just been serving the same people with the same ads, and that's not great either. You want to look at the first time impression ratio and then also the percentage of audience reached, because sometimes when you put in those limiting factors of other interest groups or targeting, age targeting or whatever, you might not be able to reach all of those, or maybe your bid cap's just too low and you're just not bidding enough for this premium audience. So really just take it step by step. And that's where having a strategic and well thought out planned testing strategy comes into place, because at that point, if you do it right, you should know what the cause is and performance should work for one way or another. If you set the right expectations and you have realistic goals, then that shouldn't be an issue. But sometimes, it still does come up, and that really helps you identify which pain point that you need to address.
Yes. Walking through the full process, the full story, being able to identify where. These are all awesome recommendations, consistent with what we say, and looking at the audience, the creative, and the funnel. But I like how you mapped out, like you really have to go through each stage that you built out in your strategy. That's why it needs to be an algorithmic strategy. That's why that can then showcase where things are falling off. Was it working? Is it working? When you're taking all of these approaches, do you have any examples or, anything where something wasn't working maybe 3 weeks in, and by week 6, you were able to surpass the CPA goals, the cost per acquisitions that the client wanted to hit, or any timelines without an example that you generally apply to these optimization processes?
Yeah. Typically, new marketers and new brands love to fidget. They love to tinker with campaigns, and they're constantly making changes. So making sure that you're letting things play out and run is very important, and giving it enough testing time. You want to make sure that you have enough conversions to, one, get out of the learning phase, two, get enough statistical data to say, yes, this is working or isn't working. So letting things kind of just sit sometimes can really help. And I know that sounds like you're not being productive, or, you're not doing your job as a marketer, you're just being lazy, but, monitor the campaigns every day, but making sure you give it enough time to really kind of optimize. Now, the caveat to that being, if something is completely out of the realm with your other tests, it's 7x what the other tests are. I'll shut down an ad, after 10, 15 add to carts sometimes, if that add to cart rate is so expensive or, is just not there, compared to, some of the other ad groups or campaigns that have, 30, 40, 50, 70 add to carts, and it has, nothing, or it's so, 7x the price. I'll shut it down. So you don't always necessarily have to wait for the 50, but you got to just kind of look at everything holistically too, right? So 50 isn't a rule of thumb, that you have to follow. It's not a law, but, take into account how other things are performing in comparison to that as well. So that'll save you a lot of time and money. But, we've had clients that have wanted to pause campaigns after 2 days because, oh no, this new audience isn't working. The new creative's not working. And, we've convinced them to let it run. And now all of a sudden, 6 months later, it's still working and is the only ad that has continued to run and is their best performance. So, make sure you give it enough time, and you let things optimize and just don't tinker too much. You realistically, during the testing phase, do not need to be tinkering with campaigns 5 times a day. And, let things kind of set out. A day's worth of data is probably not enough unless you're spending a real healthy amount of money and have previous benchmarks. The other thing to really kind of take into account is your sales cycle. That is the number one thing that I feel like marketers don't always pay attention to, is how long does it actually take someone to make a purchase? You should look at that. And what I like to do is I go in every day and pull the data and keep a log of how those things are changing every day for every ad group or campaign, to see how that data actually ages, and say, okay, well, this, campaign A was super great performer, but campaign B actually outperformed it. We look 7 days in. So we say, okay, well, this audience just takes more time to buy, and that's fine. 7 days I can live with if I'm going to get better results. I just need to know that.
Absolutely. And as it pertains to retargeting pools and the frequency, I don't look at first impression count enough. I'm going to dive into that further myself. I'll pay attention to frequency, reach, things along those lines. I really like how you pointed that out, along with the sales cycle. For us, the retargeting pool and how large that is, and watching that reflect in the overall results. So those timelines definitely paint the picture. And what about the overall sequence to scale? What about, a client who is running 4 to 10 audiences? They start seeing which ones are working. They've optimized towards it. Everything is polished and working well, and they want to do more. That example you gave earlier of the client who wants to increase their spend from 10K to 100K. Do you have any type of timelines? Are you going 2x every 3 to 7 days? Do you have anything mapped out, or any key numbers that you gauge to get a client to the scale to hit the milestones they're seeking?
Yeah. So again, different on every platform. I think one of the biggest things to look at is what you're already spending per day. And then also, what's the audience size, right? Because, I know Facebook has been making a lot of changes to their algorithm and has gotten better, but it used to be that, you should really only scale like 10 to 15% every 2 to 3 days. Otherwise you risk blowing out that budget. And I've seen clients that have gone in and killed performance so quickly overnight because they've doubled the budget in 1 day. And that runs a lot of risks as well. One of the things that you really want to take into account is that audience size and how long have you been running those ads. I think sometimes people are a little too quick to scale and saying, okay, after day 3, all right, we're going to go. We're just going to hammer this in. But then they realize, okay, well, you know what, that audience, just that scale isn't there at that performance level for this audience. So really kind of, what I like to do before anything is I'll raise it 10 to 15% and see how that works, right? Pay attention to the performance. Does it just completely crap out, or is it okay? I've seen other platforms like Google UAC, for example. Anytime I make a change, performance jumps and CPA costs go up for about a week or so and then start to normalize again. So really kind of understanding that platform's important. And, I've also been able to go in and just double the campaign budget and not see any real issues. So, really kind of start small. And if performance continues, then you can just go ahead and continue to keep scaling. But, you don't want to blow out a great performing campaign to the point where then you have to restart a new ad set or a new campaign and start from scratch. I've also had success with running multiple ad accounts in the past and running ads from different, ad accounts as a great way to scale because, a lot of times when you duplicate that same ad set and your audience is really small, that competition goes up. And that's also one of those things that I look at with the inspect button and the audience overlap buttons is that are all my lookalikes, just because I have a lookalike from one audience and one from another, what's that audience overlap look like though? If it's over 30%, I typically will not put them in two different campaigns or ad sets. I'll try to group them together because essentially what that means is 30% of the time, you're going to be bidding against yourself. So you can also look at that in Facebook under the inspect tool and see what the overlap in bidding is and keeping an eye on that. So you don't always necessarily want to just duplicate the campaign either if that audience is small. So I would much rather scale properly and slowly than blowing out full performance of a campaign, because at the end of the month, when you're giving your client a wrap-up report and you tell them that CPA is back or worse than where you started, there's nothing that makes a client lose confidence more than that.
I've been on those calls. I definitely understand. I value that perspective. And it's important. We try to communicate as much as possible. It's one of our core values is communicate early. So we try to talk about what the scaling pattern will look like when and if we're hitting the performance benchmarks that they've pre-approved there, and really try to set the stage for that. Because otherwise, when a brand comes to you and says, hey, these returns are great, how do we get more of this? How do we buy more of these audiences? How much can we get next week? Without that type of philosophy, without being able to say, hey, we're going to look at 10 to 15%. We're going to look at this period of time before trying 2x because of the audience that's available, or because of the budgeting and basically, the points that we're at the moment. So I definitely think those are, good thoughts to get out there. Are there any channels that have scaled particularly well for you, or anything you'd recommend towards the audience in terms of opportunities to scale and really take on more market share in the respective verticals?
Going back to Snapchat for a second, the scale there has been a lot more than most people would assume. And being able to scale very efficiently there has been something we've seen a lot of success with. Again, we see that for a couple of days after we scale these campaigns, we'll see performance kind of take a little bit of a hit, but then go back to normal or even better sometimes as we scaled, which is, something that you don't see a lot, right? Typically when you scale, it's at the expense of performance, but
Sure.
We've seen some great success with Snapchat there. Of course, a lot of these ad networks, OTT as well. But when it comes to straight conversion campaigns, I would say, the biggest one that we've seen that you have to monitor with scale is going to be Google, knowing that it does take about somewhere between 3 to 7 days, at least, for performance to kind of normalize. And as long as you know that and set those expectations with clients, and monitor that, I think that's totally okay. Because if things, as you scale, if performance stays the same or, even gets better, then your overall cost per acquisition is not going to be any higher at the end of the month or the quarter.
Well said. Well said. This has been a powerful conversation here. When I hear you've run over $250 million of ads, I picture billions of dollars of value that was created off that, e-commerce sales, automotive, lending. You have it across all of those verticals. So to be able to get these type of tutorial level recommendations is very valuable for me to just be a part of. It aligns with many of the things we do at DNA. You're a fellow Forbes Agency Council member as well too, and a big fan of everything going on there, because so many digital marketing agencies, digital ad networks, as we talked about, can sometimes get a bad rap. So to be able to talk about all the good things that are occurring, be able to emphasize strategies like the communication process and how to make these campaigns successfully and not blow out something when scaling. I think this makes all the difference to be able to get this type of content out there. So I want to thank you for coming on today. This has been great.
No, Jason, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Absolutely. And if the audience wants to get hold of you, what is the best way for them to do so? What are your preferred methods of communication?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, JP Johl, Johl. You can reach out to me on there. I'm pretty responsive to the LinkedIn messages that I get. You can also check out our website, adtributeagency.com. Submit a note through there. Those are probably the two most effective ways to get a hold of me.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thanks again for the time today. It's been a pleasure having you on Test Optimize Scale. Thanks for the audience for listening in. Please feel free to contact myself as well on LinkedIn. Definitely get in contact with JP, and tune in next time.